Revealed. How a billionaire's unexpected love transformed his life and gave him an incredible heir. Robert Hale strode through the glass corridor of his San Jose headquarters, exuding confidence. The boardroom awaited him like a gladiatorial arena, sharply dressed executives and financial gurus ready to challenge his next big vision. On the surface, he fit the mold of Silicon Valley triumph, his wealth sprawling out in sleek facades. Yet, beneath the polished veneer, his heart thrummed with a hollow ache. Laughter haunted the marble hallways of his sprawling estate, memories of a family he carved away for ambition. Alone in his empire, he felt the weight of each gilded trophy, unfulfilling, stagnant in its brilliance. Later that afternoon, warmth crept back into his life in the form of Emily Young. An impassioned schoolteacher with sparkling brown eyes, she filled the cafe with her fervent dreams for underfunded schools. As their gazes locked, the air crackled. Something deep inside him stirred, igniting long-buried warmth with every impassioned word she spoke. In her presence, he rediscovered the colors of purpose he thought lost in the grayscale of board meetings and stock prices. But a storm lurked on the horizon. Robert's world was a whirlwind of expense accounts, luxury cars, and cocktails with colleagues who viewed empathy as weakness. As the budding romance progressed, friends clucked their tongues, suspicion twisting around his waking thoughts like smoke. What did he even know about Emily's motivations? For the first time in years, he felt the pressure of judgment, the kind that gnawed at his concentration and boiled down to one brutal question. Was he truly worthy of this connection forged in humble intent? At his latest dinner gathering, sharp champagne flutes clinked and laughter echoed. Yet, Robert felt trapped. He was ensconced in wealth, yet waist-deep in insecurity about a girlfriend who saw potential in muddy classrooms. Her passion began to transform him, but it also unveiled fears of vulnerability, an unsettling loss of control creeping in like a dense fog. What if he wasn't enough for her? Panic prickled at the back of his mind, pushing him toward decisions that felt all too familiar, yet should have been foreign. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Just when Robert thought he could finally surrender to the swirling emotions, an envelope changed everything. Hidden in a forgotten drawer at his mother's estate was the revelation of a long-lost son, Daniel. Emily's name washed over him in waves as he imagined how their lives intertwined under circumstance. This unexpected heritage brought shock and confusion alongside beautiful possibilities. The anguish of realization struck him. A billion-dollar empire built on lonely nights might be inadequate to justify a father's absence. A family dinner with high society elites morphed into an unyielding trial. Conversations danced, everything cotton candy sweet until he fought for Daniel's place in his heart. Prejudice and privilege clashed violently as he struggled against their condescension. Would he cast aside love in favor of polished norms? Could he elevate Daniel's existence from obscurity to promise? For an instant, the tension hung thick in the air, choking voices and pinning Robert against the very life he had built. He looked around the table, each face a testament to his successes, but all of them shepherds of an outdated legacy. Torn between affection for Emily and authenticity for the son he never knew, dread pooled in his stomach. As he opened his mouth to speak, the room gasped with suspended disbelief. Which path would he choose? As uncertainty loomed, all eyes turned towards him, creating a pulsing anticipation that left Robert teetering at the edge of an unfamiliar precipice, clutching the envelope like a lifeline, silently echoing the question. Could he really embrace this unexpected fatherhood and the love Emily offered while confronting the ghosts of his past? The air in the room crackled with tension as Robert's heart raced. He could feel the gavel of judgment poised to deliver his fate. Every face around the table, once a symbol of his triumphs, now felt like prison bars, caging him in a world of their expectations. The weight of his family's legacy bore down on him, mixing unease with the paradox of hope. Should he cast aside his old instincts, break free from his gilded cage, and embrace this new reality? Robert! His mother's voice broke through the haze, laced with concern and disbelief. What are you saying? The room spun, and he clenched the envelope tighter, memories of a life lived solely for profit flooding his thoughts. Images of Daniel flashed in his mind, an innocent child whose laughter begged to be heard amidst the raucous noise of his past decisions. He stammered, seeking clarity within the chaos. His gaze flicked to Emily, her unwavering support tangible in the charged atmosphere. Her faith in him ignited a flicker of determination. He had always been strategic, calculating his every move in a world that prized gains above humanity. But what if reshaping his identity began with a leap into the unknown? Did he dare to challenge everything he had constructed? "In a few weeks I'll meet my son," he finally managed, voice steadier than he felt. He watched as the words landed on the table like stones. "And I want him to be part of my life." Silence fell, and the room held its breath as if the walls themselves were bracing against the impact. The response was immediate, a symphony of incredulous gasps mingled with murmurs of disbelief. "Robert, you have to think about this." One executive's voice sliced through the stillness. A child born out of wedlock. What will the board think?" The question sent electric shocks down his spine, echoing the hollow sound of his past choices. Robert felt something within him shift. His resolve solidified like concrete. This wasn't just about a legacy, it was about authenticity. "I'm not asking for permission," he declared, a challenging fire igniting in his chest. To embrace his son was to embrace a future, a melding of ambition and love, separate from both privilege and shame. The concept felt radical, almost revolutionary, against the backdrop of the finance-driven discussions he had often entertained. He experienced a tremor of anxiety mixed with exhilaration as he acknowledged that his journey had never just been about wealth. It had been about carving a space in the world that felt genuine. "I know it won't be easy," he continued, his voice firm. "But I've always been committed to growth, not just in business, but in who I am as a person. And if I can create change in the world through my assets, I can certainly invest in my own son." The reaction was a cocktail of ambivalence and skepticism, yet a spark of admiration flickered among a few. He could feel Emily's unwavering belief in him, amplifying his courage, whispering that perhaps he was worth something beyond the balance sheets and bottom lines. Here was a chance to truly reshape his legacy. With every heartbeat, Robert recognized an exhilarating truth. The boardroom wasn't his only battleground. This was about developing resilience, forging a necessary connection with his newfound son, and redefining the contours of his existence. Empowerment was waiting on the other side of this tumultuous decision. Now the next challenge loomed in the distance, initiating the first steps in Daniel's life. He envisioned the child's hesitant expressions meeting his, a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty mirroring his own feelings. How would he navigate the space between who he was and the father he aspired to be? The multitude of unanswered questions swirled around him like confetti, the possibilities beckoning, urging him onward. Would he be able to rise and redefine fatherhood within this complicated world? He could feel it in his bones. The truth awaited him just over the horizon, and the time had come to confront it head-on. The days leading up to his meeting with Daniel felt interminable, each hour stretching like elastic. Robert vacillated between anticipation and apprehension, practicing lines in his head, rehearsing how to bridge the chasm of years and experiences that lay between them. Each morning, he walked into the skyscraper's bright glass lobby, cradling his coffee as if it were a talisman, while his thoughts spiraled into reflections on how this new dynamic would alter his identity. He approached his work with a newfound intensity. What had once been mere numbers on papers transformed into metrics for potential change. He began to implement strategies aimed at social impact investments, and for the first time, money felt different, not just units of currency, but tools for fostering real connection and nurturing his son's future. He cautiously discussed ideas with his team that revolved around responsible growth, but the reactions mirrored the skepticism he encountered in that heated meeting with the board. Investment in socially responsible initiatives felt like a slippery slope to some, a space they weren't ready to tread. Amid the boardroom debates, he felt a growing detachment from their perspectives. How could he convey the urgency he now felt? He was beginning to understand that this was about more than corporate success. It was about crafting a world worth sharing with Daniel. The idea of bedroom walls lined with spreadsheets and projections felt unbearably sterile. He wanted Daniel to grow in a world that rewarded kindness over capital, nurturing over merely transactional relationships. As he navigated these turbulent waters, a prime opportunity dangled just beyond reach. An upcoming conference presented a chance for him to speak about the responsibility that came with wealth, a subject he'd avoided in favor of showcasing numbers and results. But this time Robert was determined to transcend the superficial. Perhaps he could pitch a forward-looking narrative that echoed his journey, a call for empathy within the boardroom. One late afternoon, sitting at his polished mahogany desk, it struck him like a lightning bolt, a sudden realization blitzing through the fog of his thoughts. This wasn't merely an opportunity to reshape not just his presentation, but to forge a new way of existing. What if he positioned his address in a way that didn't just champion progress, but also embraced vulnerability? He would open about his journey, his role as a father-in-waiting, the uncertainty that lay before him, the contradictions he faced. He could sense the thrill bubbling beneath the surface, stirring a deeper motivation. Clenching the pen with determination, he scrawled notes and ideas, feeling a swell of purpose guiding his hand. But this was only the first step. He'd need to confront resistance, not just from the suits around the table, but from his own conditioning. Would the audience listen to a man who had long been couched in privilege? The fear of inadequacy crept in, whispering doubts that he had never belonged in their circles. Yet the image of Daniel filled his mind, fortifying his resolve. If he had the courage to face down the board's judgment, could he not do the same with his own insecurities? The contrast of his old self, arrogant and calculated, gleamed like a distant memory, fading against the promise of new beginnings. With the conference looming, each sentence he shaped in his notes echoed with the urgency of his responsibility. He contemplated the risks of exposing his vulnerability. The time had come to confront the specter of failure, layered with the possibility of redemption. How would the board react when confronted with the heart behind the numbers? The potential backlash sent a ripple of apprehension through him. As the dates drew near, Robert braced himself for the dual challenge ahead, to share his awakening with his colleagues and, more crucially, to prepare to meet Daniel. Turning his gaze out the window, he caught sight of the setting sun, its fiery glow illuminating the skyline, a perfect canvas to envision the father he aspired to be. Yet, beneath the surface, a question loomed larger than all others. What would he find in Daniel's eyes when their worlds finally collided? He felt the rattle of dread alongside the expanding hope, poised for the threshold between the past and a new reality. The moment of revelation was coming, but he knew it wouldn't just be a simple meeting. It would be the defining moment where all conflicted identities would come to a head, and he must prepare to embrace not just his son, but everything he could become. The conference loomed, an intimidating specter on his calendar, and yet it was more than just a date. It felt like an important turning point. Robert immersed himself in preparation, refining his speech while questioning every phrase, every pause. The challenge was not merely in articulating his vision for corporate responsibility, but in presenting a genuine reflection of himself, a man grappling with his past and looking toward the future. As conference day approached, the echo of boardroom critiques replayed in his mind. They wouldn't just challenge his ideas, they would challenge his authenticity. Would they recognize the man behind the numbers? Or would his vulnerabilities be dismissed as weaknesses unworthy of serious consideration? The internal battle intensified, and Robert began to understand that this moment could either catalyze his evolution or imprison him in outdated paradigms. Paradoxically, beneath the trepidation boiled a surge of resolve. This was not simply a stage, it was an opportunity to forge a new identity, not just as a businessman but as a father. The specter of Daniel loomed larger, reminding him of the stakes at play. He was no longer delivering a mere presentation, he was weaving the fabric of a legacy, one built on honesty and responsibility. Late nights turned into early mornings as he immersed himself in research about ethical business practices and transformative leadership. He delved into stories of leaders who led with integrity, who faced the consequences of their decisions head-on. Each narrative he absorbed pressed him further away from the old Robert, fortified behind walls of corporate indifference, and closer to the father he longed to become. His home life provided the grounding he desperately needed. Every moment spent with Daniel, even before their anticipated meeting, tuned him into a frequency of love that transformed his outlook. Those innocent questions from his son, brimming with curiosity, unraveled layers of his self-imposed barriers. "Why do some people have more than others?" Daniel had asked, his small brow furrowed in confusion. The weight of such queries reached into Robert's heart, pushing him to confront the ethics of privilege directly. Yet amid this growth, doubts flickered like candle flames. What if this push toward vulnerability backfired? What if the board rejected his message entirely, viewing it as a radical departure from the bottom line? In these dark moments, Robert found himself returning to his notes, revising his address with a mix of trepidation and hope. As he crafted the conclusion, an idea ignited within him, stronger than the fear. He would not just share statistics or projected figures. He would recount personal anecdotes, mistakes he'd made, lessons learned, and moments where kindness had overcome the allure of profit. Finally, the day of the conference arrived. Standing at the podium, a sea of faces blurred with anxiety and anticipation, Robert drew a deep breath. The stage lights felt hot, amplifying the gravity of the moment. Looking out at the crowd, he briefly glimpsed Judith, an old colleague whose expression conveyed a hint of skepticism mingled with encouragement. He gripped the edges of the podium, feeling the weight of expectation like a shroud enveloping him. "Today isn't just about numbers," he began, his voice unexpectedly steady. "It's about people, our families, our futures, our responsibility." As he spoke, words seeped from a place of vulnerability, promising honesty and connection. Yet inside, a storm brewed, a clash between fear of rejection and desire for change. What would they make of his radical honesty? Would they embrace the challenge, or would they shrink back, adhering to their comfort zones? A shiver ran down his spine as he dared to hope for acceptance. With each passing moment, the essence of his speech appeared not merely as a narrative, but as an act of defiance against complacency. A sudden knock at the door reverberated through his thoughts, snapping him back to the present. If this were to become the beginning of his authentic self, it would not just hinge on that day's presentation, but on the conversation that awaited him afterward. Daniel would soon be in his life, his son, the reflection of everything he feared losing. Determined to embrace whatever would come next, Robert squared his shoulders. This day would be the crucible for transformation. He stepped off the podium, heart racing, ready to face the consequences of his newfound vulnerability and the profound impact it would have on his relationships, both with the boardroom and Daniel. As Robert stepped away from the podium, his chest tightened with an amalgam of fear and exhilaration. The faces in the audience painted a complex tapestry, some poised with approval, others scowling with skepticism. The shift in environment from the anxiety-laden stage to the stark reality of the boardroom tugged at his resolve. He had opened a door, but would anyone walk through it with him? In the moments that followed, he found himself dodging waves of colleagues and allies, many offering quick words of encouragement, their smiles masking the uncertainty beneath the surface. Yet Robert's focus fell on Judith, who had always been a measured voice of reason. She approached him, the flicker of intrigue in her eyes overshadowed by a hint of caution. "Robert, you were bold today," she remarked, crossing her arms, a slight furrow etching her brow. "But you know the implications, right? This isn't just a shift in tone. You're challenging the very foundation of our practices." Her words echoed like an alarm, plunging him into reflective silence. "I know," he replied tentatively. "But isn't it time we rethink what success means? We've prioritized profits over people for too long." Judith took a moment, her expression shifting from doubt to contemplation. "It's not just about rethinking, it's about implementation. You'll need to brace yourself for pushback, and worse yet, apathy. Change doesn't happen overnight." Her warnings cut deeper than the challenges ahead. They struck at the heart of his developing identity. The radical honesty he invited could not only shape corporate culture, but also reshape his relationships. With Daniel's innocent queries in mind, how could he present a future to his son founded on integrity and purpose, yet preach it in an environment steeped in profit margins and bottom lines? "Change will be incremental," Robert countered, feeling the weight of conviction swell within him. "But it starts here. I need to get into the trenches, to show them that these principles can align with our interests." Judith nodded slowly but remained unconvinced. He sensed the doubt lingering as she shifted from one foot to the other, making her way to the exit. "I wish you luck," she said, her voice softer, revealing a glimmer of support he wasn't sure he deserved. Robert lingered in the half-empty hall long after Judith departed. The tension of the day weighed heavily upon him like the stagnant air prefacing a storm. Should he rethink the very foundation of his approach? The answer sent tremors through his resolve. The next days turned into a whirlwind. He quickly scheduled meetings, eager to engage his peers in discussions about their values. However, most seemed resistive, unwilling to entertain ideas that deviated from the status quo. Each attempted conversation felt like navigating through thick fog. Their dismissals ignited frustration within him, dimming the sparks of hope he had kindled during his speech. Yet amid the turmoil, he thought of Daniel. His son's laughter cut through the fog like a beacon, In those precious moments, the doubts about his professional stride faded. Instead, another epiphany emerged. He could teach his son more than corporate jargon. He could instill values that transcended the marketplace. That evening, when the sun dipped below the horizon, Robert sat with Daniel at the dinner table. The boy regaled him with tales of a classmate's family project on kindness. Each word flowed from Daniel's mouth like music, hitting notes of innocence mixed with a yearning for understanding. As his son concluded, a profound realization washed over Robert. "What if we try to make our own project?" he proposed, excitement bubbling beneath his own tentative surface. "A kindness initiative right here at home?" Daniel's eyes gleamed. "Like a project to help others?" "Exactly. We could find ways to make our community better," Robert affirmed, the spark of inspiration igniting anew. In the days that followed, Robert dedicated himself to developing the initiative, something rooted not just in charity, but in fostering long-lasting relationships. He would invite fellow colleagues to join in, slowly drawing them into the fold of radical compassion. Yet, as the plan unfolded, the specter of resistance loomed larger. Would the board embrace what he was trying to accomplish, or would they thwart his efforts, clinging to the familiar? The real test between his evolving self and the corporate entity awaited, for he had yet to reveal the true scope of his ambition. Robert could feel the tension mounting as he prepared for the upcoming board meeting. Would they rally behind a new vision, or would his quest for integrity become his own undoing? The moment of confrontation drew near, a clash not just against the backdrop of the business world, but within himself. He took a deep breath, ready to face the stakes head-on. The time had come to face the most difficult challenge yet, conveying the importance of purpose in a place that cherished profit above all. The boardroom felt like a coliseum, each seat occupied by faces that ranged from disinterest to palpable suspicion. Robert adjusted his tie, feeling the fabric tighten around his neck like a noose. He squinted at the presentation slides, bright yet overwhelming, each bullet point a reminder of the uphill battle before him. As he began to speak, Robert drew on the energy he'd cultivated over the past few weeks. The warmth of Daniel's laughter and the thrill of their budding kindness initiative propelled him forward. He opened with a story, a narrative from his own childhood of communities coming together, of how collaboration had led to genuine change. He watched as some faces softened, a glimmer of recognition kindling in the eyes of a few. Perhaps this was the moment he could connect, where personal resonance might drown out professional skepticism. Yet, as he navigated through the proposal, faces hardened again with resistance. Martin, the CFO, interjected sharply. "This all sounds lovely, Robert, but we need to focus on what drives our profits. These initiatives require resources, and frankly, I'm not convinced they'll yield any measurable return." Robert paused, grappling with his impulse to retreat into the familiar defense of numbers and metrics. But he reminded himself that this was strictly about values. "Martin, what if the real return lies beyond the balance sheet? What if we're at the brink of redefining success itself?" "You mean opening the door for disaster?" Judith's voice rang out, the very caution he'd sensed from her at the speech returning with force. "What you're proposing could tarnish our reputation. You'll risk everything we've built." The exchange ignited a fire in Robert's chest. He had to double down, not just for himself, but for Daniel. Success should not just be painted in profits. People invest in companies that reflect their values. If we genuinely want to lead in the market, we have to be more than just a faceless entity in the boardroom. We need to stand for something. Judith's expression remained unchanged, her skepticism a wall he had to breach. It was clear that this conversation was as much a personal confrontation as it was professional. Why was he suddenly so willing to risk it all? It was a question that screamed within him, but Robert sought clarity rather than retreat. With each passing moment, he laden the atmosphere with the potential that lay at the intersection of purpose and profit. He spoke of customers seeking authenticity, of employees motivated by shared values, and of communities that thrived alongside a prosperous business. A vision emerged, not of mere charity, but of transformation, a culture where purpose intertwined with progress. As Robert concluded, a silence enveloped the room. He could feel Judith's skeptical gaze weigh heavily upon him, her thoughts spiraling in the deep crevices of her cautious pragmatism. The silence was an adversary. Finally, Martin broke the quiet. "Let's say we consider this. What would the first steps look like? How do we begin to align this with our current initiatives?" It was a concession, albeit tepid. But Robert seized the moment, throwing out ideas, engaging the room in dialogue. He felt himself shifting from a mere proposé to a collaboration. The tide wasn't at his back yet, but he was beginning to see that perhaps tides could be turned. By the end of the meeting, a tentative agreement had formed, more on the grounds of exploration than commitment. Still, it felt monumental. He was slowly beginning to carve a niche for himself, establishing a foothold amid the towering figures of corporate rigidity. Walking out, a sense of invigoration washed over him. Judith trailed behind, her expression a mask of contemplation. "You did well," she admitted, albeit reluctantly. "But don't pat yourself on the back just yet. This was merely the beginning, and it won't be easy." "I'm ready for whatever lies ahead," Robert said, a determined fire igniting within. "I'm finally ready to fight for what I believe in." But as he left the room, something loomed larger in his thoughts, a creeping doubt that was beginning to feel like a shadow. What if the resistance wasn't just external, but rooted deep within him? Deep within the ethos of what he had always known? The stakes had been raised, an intricate game of values was in play, and the looming question persisted. Would he truly be capable of redefining success, not just for himself, but for those around him? Each step felt heavier as he thought of the impending challenges, setting the tone for the next confrontation, both within and outside the boardroom. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with the risk of failure or extraordinary transformation. Would he rise to the occasion, or would he falter under the weight of doubt just when it mattered most? The battle was only beginning, and the consequences were far bigger than he had yet realized. Robert's footsteps echoed in the corridor as he moved away from the boardroom, the remnants of the meeting's tension still clinging to him like a heavy fog. He felt both exhilarated and terrified. The concession from Martin was a small victory, yet it felt razor-thin in the face of Judith's unwavering skepticism. Self-doubt gnawed at him, intensifying with every step toward his office. Was he truly equipped to turn this fragile thread of support into something substantial? In his office, sunlight filtered through the blinds, illuminating a space cluttered with paperwork and the remnants of prior projects. He sank into his chair, allowing the gravity of his recent engagement to settle. It was time to devise a strategy, to turn his ambitious vision into actionable steps. But how could he convince his colleagues to journey with him? That was the question rattling in his mind. He considered Daniel's laughter, recalling the conversations they shared about the potential for transformative initiatives. There was a competence there that was unmistakable, and Robert realized he needed to channel that energy. He rifled through documents scattered around his desk, searching for data that could bolster his arguments, statistics that could reassure his skeptics. But no number was as compelling as the stories of success he had witnessed firsthand. His thoughts wandered to an employee, Sarah, who had joined the company in the last year. She had been instrumental in implementing a small community garden project that had unexpectedly elevated office morale. Employees gathered to tend to the garden during breaks, forming connections that had rippled through various departments. The initiative's success was directly linked to an increase in productivity. Yet when Robert had brought it up before, the response had been lukewarm at best. In that moment, realization struck him. It wasn't always about cold metrics. Could he invoke emotion through testimonials? Gathering narratives wasn't just about support. It was a way to build a foundation of genuine belief within the company. Empowered by this thought, Robert called Sarah into his office for an impromptu meeting. "Can you share how you approached the community garden?" he asked, his mind racing with possibilities. As Sarah recounted her journey, facing doubts yet persevering for the sake of personal satisfaction, Robert felt a shift within himself. He recorded her words, every nuance dripping with passion and triumph. This was the type of story that could pierce through skepticism, one that would travel through the veins of his colleagues, forging a connection they'd never anticipated. "You see, it wasn't just about the plants," she explained. "It became about teamwork, about taking something small and making it significant." Robert nodded, his mind whirring as he pieced together a rudimentary outline of the presentation he would make next. He would showcase these real-life stories, juxtaposing them with the hard profits. He envisioned a movement toward redefining success, not merely through numbers and financial forecasts, but human commitment and collective growth. Just as clarity emerged, his phone buzzed. Judith's name flashed across the screen, and hesitation froze him momentarily. What could she possibly want? The tone of their last exchange lingered, the underlying tension unbroken. He reluctantly swiped to answer. "Robert." Her voice was measured, yet there was a trace of something else beneath her caution. "I've been reflecting on our conversation. I want to know more about how you plan to implement these ideas." We need to be careful, yes, but perhaps there is merit in exploring more evidence-driven approaches. Was this what he had been waiting for? A bridge instead of a wall. He could hear the curiosity in her tone, a willingness to engage that hadn't previously existed. "I have a number of stories and case studies to share, Judith," he replied, feeling a surge of determination welling inside him. "I think if we start with those, we can build a narrative that resonates with the entire team." As he hung up, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Judith would be his conduit, and their unlikely collaboration could hammer down the barriers of resistance. The path was becoming clearer, and the pieces of his plan were starting to align. Yet the shadow of self-doubt still lingered, whispering that he was walking a tightrope between ambition and caution. Would his efforts be enough to sway the board, or would his attempts lead to potential backlash? More importantly, would he falter when faced with the weight of those trying to challenge his convictions? The clock ticked down, and he understood that the moment to face these revelations was fast approaching, stretching out before him into an unknown expanse, just waiting to be navigated. The next confrontation was looming on the horizon, and he felt the electric tension of change crackling in the air surrounding him. Robert stared at the computer screen, the blinking cursor seeming to mock his hesitation. It was time to translate the surge of creative energy into a structured plan. He pulled up a blank document and began drafting an outline. The urgency of his mission pressed down on him, but he recognized that this clarity was a privilege. He had a second chance with Judith, and he couldn't afford to waste it. He started with a captivating title, Reviving Our Vision, The Power of Personal Stories. It felt right. He needed to highlight that change stemmed from values and experiences, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. Details from Sarah's account replayed in his mind, and he could see the ripples of her community garden initiative expanding far beyond what she had initially envisioned. Just as he began to flesh out his ideas, a gentle knock interrupted him. It was Daniel, leaning against the doorway, an unreadable expression on his face. "Hey, mind if I come in?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for a response. He closed the door behind him, a sense of gravity filling the small office space. "Of course, Daniel," Robert replied, unsure whether the meeting was a welcome distraction or an unwelcome interruption. Daniel took a seat, nodding toward the scattered papers. "You look deep in thought. What's going on?" Caught off guard, Robert hesitated, debating whether to share his plans. But the sincerity in Daniel's eyes urged him forward. "I just had a breakthrough with Judith. I'm planning to present a series of personal case studies to better illustrate the impact of our initiatives." "Interesting." Daniel leaned back, crossing his arms as he considered this. "What are you drawing from?" "Sarah's garden project is my starting point. It's more than just a crop. It was about connection and purpose. I want to bring real stories to the forefront that reflect our company culture." Daniel nodded but remained quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his response carefully. "That's a solid approach. But what if Judith's skepticism runs deeper than just needing evidence? What if she views this as irrelevant?" The words hit Robert like a sudden cold breeze. Could Judith's scrutiny truly be that profound? He felt exposed, the layers of his plan unraveling just as he began to sew them together. "I can't afford to underestimate her again," he admitted, anxiety creeping up his spine. "What if the emotional angle falls flat on her? She's always been about numbers." "Then it's up to you to make her see the numbers behind those stories," Daniel countered. "If you connect the emotional to the tangible, you might just break through that wall, but you'll need to prepare for pushback." Pushback. The word loomed large. Robert's mind raced back to previous interactions, the challenges he'd faced attempting to engage the board. Would they question every story he presented? Would they demand metrics that he had yet to compile? "Do you think I can do this?" he questioned, insecurity creeping into his voice. "Of course you can. Remember, stories are often more convincing than statistics. If you believe in their validity, you'll inspire others to do the same. Just make sure those stories are framed correctly," Daniel replied, his voice steadying Robert's inner turmoil. Encouraged now, Robert began drafting key points for each story he wanted to tell. With Daniel's support, he felt less like he was teetering on a tightrope and more like he was building a bridge. But as resolve settled in, a new thought tugged at him. What if Judith wasn't the only skeptic? What if others on the board would dismiss his work without considering its value? Robert leaned back in his chair, breath caught between exhilaration and rising apprehension. There lingered a subtle warning that today's triumph could morph into tomorrow's failure. Only one way to fix that: a rehearsal. He'd need to practice his presentations, refine his arguments, and anticipate rebuttals. Every story would have to be polished and connected to the core ambitions of the company for maximum impact. But Robert would have to confront skepticism not just from Judith, but from the entire board. The clock was ticking, and every moment counted. With Daniel's encouragement fueling his ambition, Robert delved deeper into crafting a narrative that could unite vision and reality. But would he find the right balance before the presentation, or would self-doubt return to cloud his clarity at the pivotal moment? The next day dawned with a sense of urgency that gripped Robert's thoughts with an iron hand. He cast a glance at the digital clock across the room, the bright numbers tallying seconds that slipped away like sand in an hourglass. He couldn't shake the gnawing anxiety as he sat in front of his laptop, seeking clarity amidst the chaos swirling in his mind. Judith's upcoming meeting loomed larger than any deadline he had ever faced. Robert opened a new document, his fingers hovering above the keys, and he began writing down not just stories, but also the data that could support them. The challenge before him was becoming crystalline. He needed numbers to accompany narratives. He had to prove that the emotions tied to each story had tangible impacts on the company's bottom line. As the words flowed, so too did the realization that he had put himself in a dual role, storyteller and analyst. He was more than just the architect of personal stories. He had become a bridge between the heart and the mind of the business. He took a deep breath, allowing the thrill of this newfound perspective to wash over him. Perhaps part of his doubt stemmed from underestimating his capacity to integrate these two worlds. Hours passed with Robert working tirelessly, and by lunchtime he had outlined a plan that interspersed personal anecdotes with measurable outcomes. His heart raced as he imagined the boardroom, Judith's discerning gaze evaluating every detail. Was he now set to educate them about the value of storytelling, or perhaps to reignite a spark in the deadpan faces before him? Yet, a gnawing fear clawed at him. What if his approach fell flat? The prospect haunted him. This internal conflict manifested in his actions. He rearranged his notes, changed phrases, and sought the perfect balance between data, story, and purpose. Determined not to leave anything to chance, Robert reached out to colleagues for feedback. He scheduled quick catch-ups with a few key people, hoping to gain insight and perspectives. As he gathered their thoughts, he noted a consistent theme. Results mattered, but so did the context in which they were presented. He needed not just to convince Judith, but to uplift the entire board, drawing them into a vision of potential. The days evaporated, and soon he was standing in front of a mirror, rehearsing his lines. He adopted a commanding presence, balancing urgency with a calm demeanor. Each story was more than a mere tale. They were threads woven into a larger tapestry, representing the company's mission and values. But beyond that revelation lingered another daunting concern, this time regarding the skeptical board members who weren't just indifferent, but openly challenged. Would they remain immovable, clutching to their metrics, dismissing the emotional depth he sought to articulate? Feeling the weight of his task, Robert's mind spiraled into overdrive. He needed to anticipate every challenge and build responses into his presentation. What if they entirely rejected the emotional component? Could he stand firm in articulating the necessity of connecting numbers to lives touched? The day of the presentation approached like a freight train. A steady stream of self-doubt flickered beneath his skin. He questioned if he had truly prepared enough. Each rehearsal revealed more about his approach, but also illuminated the cracks in his confidence. As he closed his notes for the evening, he found himself at the crossroads of possibility and fear. Would he rise to the occasion or crumble under pressure? The electric anticipation coursed through him. He realized that this was more than a presentation. It was a defining moment for his career and his connection with Judith. With a new determination, Robert jotted down one final thought. What if this was not just about professional development, but a personal journey towards change? He understood that beyond the metrics and stories was his ambition to forge a connection with the board, to unite them around a shared vision that transcended their skepticism. Each heartbeat intensified the moment's gravity. Just before sleep claimed him, another small revelation sparked within him. What if he opened with a personal experience of his own, one that would set the stage for everything to come? As he drifted off, the answer awaited him, laden with potential, yet fraught with uncertainty. Tomorrow would be the day everything could change. But could he truly confront the skepticism that awaited him? Robert stood at the entrance of the conference room, a pocket of empty space where anxiety vacillated with determination. The boardroom felt different today, a battleground not just for numbers and profits, but for change. The weight of self-doubt had been a constant companion, but it had begun to shift. In its place, he felt a surge of purpose, ignited by newfound clarity. He glanced at Judith, seated among the sharp-suited executives, her eyes keen with scrutiny. Today was crucial. If he wanted to redefine success, he would have to connect the personal stories he had gathered with the tangible benefits his company could reap. Daniel's curious voice echoed in his mind. If you believe in their validity, you'll inspire others to do the same. Taking a deep breath, Robert stepped forward, grounding himself in the room's energy. Thank you all for coming today, he began, projecting steadiness. I believe it's time we reconsider what success represents within our organization. He watched as the initial skepticism played out on their faces, a mixture of indifference and intrigue. He had prepared a compelling opening story about Sarah's community garden project, emphasizing its impact not just on employee morale, but also on productivity metrics. As he spoke, he noticed Judith shift slightly, her interest piqued by the emotional weight of the narrative he delivered. Then, as he seamlessly wove anecdotes into reliable data, he saw a shift in the room. Faces softened, nods began to emerge, and murmurs of agreement cascaded around him. Encouragement washed over him, fortifying his resolve. Numbers alone tell us one part of the story, he continued, building momentum. But these stories reveal our values. They show the human experience behind each decision we make. We have the opportunity to redefine our metrics, focusing on impact rather than solely profit. He directly addressed the challenges he had faced with their ancient mindset. I understand it's a leap and change can invoke fear, but isn't it our responsibility to innovate? We have to evolve beyond raw numbers and embrace a narrative that includes empathy. Each word resonated, igniting discussions rather than resistance. Judith's eyes reflected a measure of respect he hadn't seen before, their previous standoff shifting into budding collaboration. As Robert articulated the strategic relevance of compassion paired with profit, moments of clarity crystallized around the room. His colleagues began to engage, challenging him to outline practical steps forward, wanting to understand how they could align these new values with the existing operational frameworks. Success isn't merely about our quarterly reports, it's about our standing within the community. We can be leaders using our resources to drive sustainable change. This is our chance, he urged, drawing on their shared aspirations to build a legacy worth championing. The thrilling connection electrified the air. A breakthrough, not of victory over dissenters, but of unity unfolding like a flower, slow and grounded, yet bursting with potential. The meeting flowed with palpable energy. By the end, an actionable framework emerged, one that combined stories with measurable impact. Let's pilot this, Robert suggested, receiving nods of approval around the table. As they wrapped up, Robert felt a profound sense of accomplishment settle deep in his chest. Judith approached him, her expression reflective. You brought us with you today, she admitted, and he could hear genuine respect in her tone. This wasn't just a presentation, it was a call to action. Their gazes locked, and Robert felt a wave of gratitude for the journey that had molded him into someone ready to embrace risk and change. A man whose life was no longer defined by profit margins, but by the depth and richness of connection. Walking out of the boardroom, he noticed a familiar sound. Laughter, his son's laughter drifting through the distance, reminded him that this was just the beginning. Future challenges awaited, but he had faced them head-on. He recognized that he was transformed. A leader, a father, a man unafraid to wield vulnerability. This was the moment when professional triumph intertwined with personal resolution, and Robert could finally accept that he was worthy of both success and love. Now, more than ever, he was ready to embrace the path ahead, not just for himself, but for Daniel, and for the world they could shape together. You need to subscribe now to witness more transformative stories. This is the moment to show your support. Leave a like now to fuel our journey forward. Comment your reactions and theories about Robert's path. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this heartwarming conclusion.